In roughly about a month, depending on when you see this, Genshin Impact will have completed 3 full years of active release and enter its 4th year guns blazing with the release of Fontaine, the land of Hydro, Justice, and lots of baguette. There's gonna be a ton of memes about France during 4.0, mark my words. Hard to believe the game has been out for 3 years now and 2020 feels like it was just yesterday. In many ways, Genshin has both changed yet stayed the same, typical yet unusual for a gacha game, but of course, it's still the subject of endless discussion, debate, and discourse among the greater gaming community, though not as much as it used to be. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine who also makes Genshin content, Sevi, launched a podcast series, and in her first episode she called to attention player Burnout, discussing how different types of players feel about the game after having played for so long, and what was the main cause behind their burnout. I think that's something we can all relate to, especially for those of us who've been around since version 1. All of us have good memories of Genshin in some way, shape, or form, but there's a multitude of comments and threads about players growing exhausted or bored of the game. Version 4 will naturally bring a lot of attention back to the game, but I think long term it's something worth addressing, so I wanted to offer my own thoughts on it. Content is first and foremost what drives players to keep playing the game or stop playing altogether. People don't get burned out from doing stuff, they get burned out from doing a certain kind of stuff and from the reasons for doing that stuff, especially if that stuff is repetitive, uninteresting, or tedious. You can eat different kinds of cereal all you want, but cereal is still cereal. Gotta mix it up a bit. The advent of Fontaine in version 4 was actually the impetus for me making this video because it highlights how important content is towards driving player engagement. Over the summer and late spring, I read a lot of comments on Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, and my Discord server about how completely disappointed the fandom, or at least a part of it was, in the latter half of Sumeru's timeline, causing a measurable decline in player activity as evident by lowered sales, views on videos, and whatnot across the board. Coincidentally, Honkai Star Rail debuted this past April, drawing a significant portion of the Genshin player base's attention where it has stayed up until version 4. And where does all that stem from? Content, in this context, lack thereof. That wasn't the first instance of waning enthusiasm by the community. Version 2.8, 2.7, and 2.6 were on the slower side too, and 1.6 and 1.5 as well. I think during the spring and early summer, players burn out or play less, if not stop playing entirely for one reason or another, with their excitement firing back up whenever there's a new version, 2.0, 3.0, and now 4.0. Now, the diminishing of player enjoyment isn't exactly the same in every version. Genshin was still widely popular even during 1.5 and 1.6, owing to the game still being novel and the world of Teyvat being expanded upon greatly. The Golden Apple Archipelago serving as an entirely new, albeit temporary area, lended credence to that. Version 2.6 to 2.8 also maintained some semblance of lasting enjoyment, namely through the Chasm, a heavily foreshadowed area within Liyue that, while exhaustingly long and tedious at times, was a big deal to many players. Summer Fantasia was kind of a love it or hate it in my opinion. On one hand, it was awesome to have the archipelago brought back, and we also got to experience more interpersonal character development for those involved. But on the other hand, it could have been seen as recycled content to some extent, even though 2.8 was quite different from 1.6. Version 3.5 to 3.8 was when the trend of the second half of every version being worse in air quotes than the first half became more and more noticeable. Even though version 3.6 brought with us the new subregion Girdle of the Sands, it didn't carry the same level of awe and wonder as other areas, such as a Chasm and Kanomia or Dragonspine, mainly due to it consisting of more of what we've seen for many months before that, sand. All the memes about half of Sumeru's exploration being an endless desert made more desert not as enticing of a prospect. In comparison, Dragonspine and Kanomia and the Chasm had environments that wildly contrasted from their main regions, not to mention they were a lot smaller and more condensed in content. Exploration aside, there's a very clear pattern of events that take place. The first half of a version features a lot of new expository content for players to enjoy. Versions 1.0 to 1.3, 2.0 to 2.3, 3.0 to 3.3, they serve to introduce us to the new area, its inhabitants, all the new characters, enemies, overworld exploration, and most importantly, the overarching narrative and conflict that drives the plot forward. August to December is a great time for Genshin since everything is new, interesting, and refreshing. But in the following months, January and onwards, that engagement gradually decreases, and much of that has to do with 1. The novelty of the new expansion wearing off, and 2. The main content we get with those versions. Forgive me if this is a hot take, but I can't help but feel like all content for Genshin that takes place from the yearly Lantern Rite event to before the next version gives off the same kind of vibe as filler episodes in anime, a lull from one major arc in the story to another. Version 1 was sort of the exception since with it came 2 regions, Mondstadt and Liyue, but version 2 and version 3 definitely came off that way to me. I'm not saying nothing of import happened during 2.4 to 2.8 or 3.4 to 3.8, but those updates don't carry the same gravity as the earlier versions, especially once the region's arc conquest finalizes. This was particularly noticeable in version 3. Version 3.4 was the annual Lunar New Year festival event with Lantern Rite, which is of course a return back to Liyue to celebrate, and most if not all of its events comprised minigames and party activities. 3.5 right after, Windbloom, another revisit to Mondstadt with another festival type event with, once again, minigames and activities. Parade of Providence, yet another festival type event with minigames and activities. To repeat, yes, there was the new desert area, but the flagship event, the one that gives the Crown of Insight, was on another festival event. 3.7 Duel the Summoner's Summit. If you're a fan of the Genshin TCG, then you probably enjoyed this one, but for those who didn't, it was once again another festival type event. And finally, Secret Summer Paradise, another festival event. Though in their defense, this one takes place in a new time-limited area just like the Golden Apple Archipelago, so at least there's a new location to explore. To be clear, I'm not trying to be dismissive of the effort and work put into each of these events. Every flagship event is unique and brings something different to the table, but they all still fit under the umbrella of festivities and minigames. Not saying that's a bad thing. Genshin's an open world game with open-ended ways to play it. For some, these events make for fun, engaging ways to kill time, namely in conjunction with the smaller events they do like the one where you can make your own domain a while back, and it also breathes more life into the worlds of Teyvat, with characters from one region journeying to another in celebration of the event. But when given to us consecutively, one after another, it's understandable why players have grown tired of the game and have decided to just play Star Rail until Fontaine came out. Now, a lot of this comes down to your priorities. I myself enjoyed the action side of Genshin, the combat and whatnot. Someone might be a lore buff and immerse themselves in the game's mythos, another might be a fan of exploration and want to check out all the new stuff. Another might like the various minigames, so on and so forth, but you can kinda guess where this is going. The flagship event serves as every update's main body of content for the next month and a half, give or take, and back in versions 1 and 2, they catered to all demographics relatively fairly. For example, in version 2, for the combat/fighting people, we had Labyrinth Warriors, Enkanomiya, and the Chasm. For exploration people, we had once again Enkanomiya, the Chasm, a revisit to the Golden Apple Archipelago, and Dragonspine. The explorers ate well. Lore fans got to enjoy seeing more development for Albedo, the overarching plot of the Chasm, a more detailed look at some less popular characters like Xinyan, and the first time Inazuma opened its borders to tourists during Zephyr of the Violent Garden. And there were tons of mini-games to enjoy throughout the year. In comparison, the bulk of events in version 3 was very heavy on the minigame and lore buff side of things, with less on exploration and even less on combat. In terms of exploration, Sumeru is huge, easily double the size of Mondstadt I wager, but more than 2/3 of that exploration was through barren desert and underground caverns that, to no one's surprise, became monotonous rather quickly. I mean, ecologically and environmentally, that's very accurate to what a desert is supposed to be, but after experiencing the sheer diversity of environments we had in version 2 with how different all of Inazuma's islands were, and Konomiya, Chasm, and whatnot, it's apparent as to why players grew tired of version 3 halfway through it. I'm aware we had a few combat-centric events like Feast of Departed Warriors, but minor scale events don't come off as appealing when the type of rewards you get don't complement it. In addition, because Crown of Insights are acquired mostly through flagship events, it pressures everyone regardless of what kind of player they are to complete those events lest they miss out on them. It wouldn't be that big of a problem if the events had a little something for everyone, but festival-related events are for the most part dialogue and minigames, only occasionally having an aspect of combat or exploration. Video games already faced an uphill battle for retention the moment they release into the market. The virtue of constantly updating games is that they can maintain player interest by simply adding new content, something Genshin both succeeds and fails at to an extent. Objectively, if we compare numbers to numbers, the amount of stuff you can do in Genshin far exceeds the range of activities available to you in other gacha games. The question then becomes, what kind of playtime? And I think that's where Genshin fails. Not everyone cares to go Super Mario 64 on the game in 100% every part of the map. At the same time, not everyone enjoys heavily combat-centric elements, or lore bombs, or minigames. The goal is to find a level balance across all of them, or ideally find a way to integrate all aspects together. Perilous Trail is a good case study of this. You had a massive lore bomb, a new area of exploration with a new mechanic based on luminescence, not to mention the different puzzles scattered about the chasm, and the 3 domains that came with the chasm's bed had some combat included alongside the various new enemies and Rift Serpent boss. It had something for everyone, and they were spliced evenly throughout the event so you wouldn't have too much dialogue, too much exploration, or too much combat in one sitting. It was a long event, don't get me wrong, but it was a good one and engaged every type of player. Plus, it took place in an entirely new area, which makes it more interesting than if it took place in an area we've already been in. I get that there's actual continuity behind repeat events for Genshin, which is more than I can say for other gachas. The Windbloom Festival of 3.5 spotlights new characters than the one in 1.4. Every Lantern Rite has its own set of events too, so they're not rerunning old events for filler per se. But once again, unless you're a lore buff or enjoy festive type events, for everyone else, it revisits the same areas over and over and over again, with no real lasting significance to the surrounding environment. I love Mondstadt as much as the next guy, but there are too many events that bring you back to the place. It would have been cooler to have new areas to check out or flagship events that took place in less explored areas. Maybe that's just personal bias though. I love the Chasm, Golden Apple Archipelago, and Enkonomiya events because they occurred in entirely new places, rather than going back to Liyue, Inazuma, or Mondstadt for the 5th time. In concert with recent flagship events being focused too much on quote-unquote filler, I think another big contributor to Burnout, especially when it comes to gacha games, is when content starts getting samey. Gacha games have a very high turnover rate despite being an industry that one would think encourages retention through sunk cost fallacy. The reason for that is because content formats get recycled a lot. Take the concept of flagship events. No matter what type it is, whether combat-oriented such as Labyrinth Warriors, exploration-oriented such as Enkonomiya, minigame-oriented such as Lantern Rite, what have you, all flagship events have the same general assortment of goodies. Leveling materials, ascension materials, talent materials, some mora, maybe some furniture for the teapot, and the Crown of Insight. They're pretty much the same every time and are usually purchased via event shops with currency obtained during the event. The only exception is the event-exclusive weapon or maybe a character, but for the most part, all flagship events, and by extension all events period, have the same basic assortment of rewards. For newcomers, this is a godsend for catching up, but players who have been around since the beginning of the game probably don't need anything except their Crown of Insight and maybe the 4-star weapon, which makes it that much more of a chore to complete when you don't get enough out of it. Rewards are something of a universal incentive. If the reward is big enough, players will be more willing to do things they wouldn't have otherwise. A lot of this is sort of a consequence of the game's design itself. Genshin is mechanically very simple. It doesn't have a billion methods of upgrading a character the way other gachas do, so it's difficult for them to spice up the rewards outside of giving us like Style Fortunas for characters. But I mean, even that would be pretty neat. A universal 4-star Style Fortuna would definitely entice a lot of players to do events. It doesn't address the root issue of recent events having all been sort of the same thing, but it's better than nothing. Long term though, that's kind of an inevitability with these games. Unless they add entire new game mechanics or content formats, eventually each event that comes out will feel similar to the ones that came before. Go through the opening quest, unlock the minigames or side events, complete the challenges, get currency, spend currency on items, rinse, and repeat. They do a good job differentiating the minigames and side quests, don't get me wrong, it's just that ultimately we're doing them for the same things as events from version 1, and when those things cease to be valuable or appealing to us, we won't feel as gratified completing them. That's often why once in a while games give us an entirely new content format to work with. Genshin doesn't. Everything they do has been within the same overall format ever since the game came out. While this poses an entirely new concern of power and/or feature creep, developers keep things interesting by expanding on the game, both in content and systems. They go hand in hand. If hypothetically, Genshin released an expansion that now allows characters to ascend to level 100 and unlock a second elemental skill, and makes it so the flagship event offers rewards that are necessary for ascending units from 90 to 100, and perhaps a new dungeon or boss to test their new skills, that would make the event in question 8,000 times more worth doing because it plays into the new system expansion. We are 3 years in, and barring Dendro, the combat has not been expanded upon in any way. Character progression has not been expanded upon, no new weapons, no new classes, no new endgame dungeons, nothing new has been foundationally added to Genshin Impact, making the repetitive monotony of the game feel even more noticeable. Point being, there's not enough new stuff to Genshin to keep players interested and entertained. And what little stuff that is new only caters towards a fraction of the total demographic of players. MiHoYo puts a lot of thought and care to each version and each update, but not only have they kind of gone in the wrong direction with that care, but the base game feels very much the same now as it did when it first came out. It's just that there are more characters and more areas, that's about it. That doesn't make for a very convincing reason for players to keep playing the game if it's more of the same general stuff. That's what I meant by the game both changing a lot yet not changing at all. Anyways, the video is getting kind of long, so I'll conclude my discussion here. I think the game has come a long way since 2020 in terms of characters, world building, and the range of activities there is to do in a broader sense, but I myself feel like the game is heavily overdue for some kind of big crazy systems expansion. The novelty of Fontaine will definitely draw players back into the game, but if version 4 ends up being a repeat of 3 and 2, we're gonna have the same eventual outcome, where once the Archon quest is complete and the region is fully unlocked, players will burn out from the game and quit again during the spring and summer, or possibly even earlier. For them to maintain player retention, they have to really make 4.4 to 4.8 more interesting by introducing new systems or more balanced events that cater towards every type of player, ideally both. What do you guys think? Do you agree with my assessment of what has burned the Genshin fandom out, or do you think it's something else entirely? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you love to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at VarsFarum, join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.